Welcome to the Guthrie Family Podcast. I'm Danny and this is Haley. We're a parenting and relationship podcast, and today we're actually going to be talking about marriage relationships. We're going to talk about communication between a husband and a wife and how that impacts your children.
So we had a couple of ladies comment about being on the same page with your spouse. So that was a problem with a lot of women, was being on that same page with the spouse as far as discipline goes.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the things they said one of the biggest things that they struggle with is her and her husband discipline their children the same way.
Don't discipline the same way.
Right. They don't discipline the same
Right.
way. So we want to talk a little bit about that today and how important that is in the process of raising your children.
Right. I think that's something that I think it's a very common problem. I think we all at some point have problems with communicating with our spouse about discipline because we all come from our own backgrounds and have ideas about how we think things should be done. We know how our parents did things, and either we want to do things just like them or we want to do some things nothing like them.
Completely.
So, but we can sometimes on that pendulum swing, we can swing too far one way or the other.
Right.
And so the biggest thing is, and I think it's extremely important that your spouse and you are on the same page, because if Danny and I are not on the same page, that's going to create a lot of problems in our relationship and our relationships with our children.
And your children's going to see that. We've talked about this before, that if you're not on the same page, and if Haley's getting on to the kids and I break in and I say something, then the kids are going to be able to see that dissension between us, and they'll play you against one another, and it's only going to make things a lot worse. So one of the most important things is never disagree with your spouse in front of your children. Now we're speaking from healthy relationships. We're not speaking from relationships with abuse or anything like that. So we're speaking directly from semi-healthy relationships.
Right. I mean, we all have struggles, but we definitely. So what we're going to talk about a little bit today is submission on the part of the wife and discipline, and we're talking about normal discipline. Biblical discipline. We're not talking about beating children or anything like that, because obviously if you're in that relationship or in that situation, you and your children need to leave. So this is not something we are addressing today. So, but one of the big things as far as that goes in discipline with and not being on the same page with our spouse is the way that we communicate with our spouse about that. And so we tend to, as women, we love our children so much, and we do anything for them. I mean, once they're born, we just want the best for them. And so what we don't sometimes consider, and this is where dads come into play, is if we don't nip some things in the bud, we're going to raise some spoiled brats. And so you when they turn 2, you get on board with the discipline issue. But if we are not on the same page with our spouse, and we tell our spouse that in front of the children, that creates problems with us and with the children. And so the biggest thing that we can do as women is to submit to our husbands. And this is a biblical principle. Thank you. It's not a very popular principle, especially in this modern world. We as women want to be very independent, and I'm not against independence, but I am against you not being submissive to your husband. And
I think where a lot of that comes from is because when they hear that, the first thing that pops in their mind is it being unequal. Like if she's submitting to me, that means that she's lesser than me, and that is not the case, and that is not biblical at all. She is a helpmate to me. We are equal. But there's roles that she plays, and there's roles that I play. But we're equal in this relationship, but she is submissive to my decisions.
Right. And let me just say too, in a healthy relationship, you should be able to discuss with your husbands how you feel. So the way that our relationship works is that, Danny and I have talked about how we think we should discipline our children. We have discussed it for long periods of time, years and years. We've written things down. We've decided this is how we're going. These are the ways that we're going to discipline our children, and every child's different. Right. So certain disciplines are not going to work with certain personalities.
A funny thing about that is that before we got before we started fostering, I was under. I thought a spanking would fix everything. Like you just spank them, they'll understand that's not what we want from them. and that they will respond. And I was, you couldn't have told me any different. But when we started fostering, obviously when children come in from foster care, you can't spank them. Some of them probably need it, but you can't. And you have to use other ways of discipline. Well, through that process, what I learned is that some children don't really respond to spankings. Now, sometimes that's necessary, maybe, to pop them or to get their attention so that they're not in danger. But for the most part, there's a lot of children that don't respond real well to spankings. And I grew from that. Haley and I, we've had that conversation, and I feel like I grew a lot from that, because a spanking don't always fix everything.
Right. And that is something that you learn as you go, and different personalities as you study your child's personality. It's really interesting to see how they respond to certain things. And there are certain things that there's a greater aversion to than spankings, than pain. So all that to say, when I go back, let's go back to what we talk about, submission.
Right.
As far as that goes, is respecting your husband. And I'm not saying that anybody that made this comment that you don't respect your husband, that you're not submitting, or that you're not doing something you're supposed to do. What I am saying is that if you're communicating to your spouse in a way that they understand that they're respected, and not your husband particularly, men need respect. Women need love. We read a book. It is called Love and Respect, and it's by Egerich. I don't know exactly how you pronounce his name, but that's my Southern pronunciation, Egerich. So anyways, he talks about this a lot, and that was groundbreaking for us, because we as women tend to love our husbands, and our husbands tend to respect us.
Because we always give what we want.
Right.
Most people, whatever they want, they give instead of giving what the other person needs.
But men need to be respected.
Right.
And women need to be loved. So Danny can respect me for going to work every day and cleaning the house and, things that I do. He can respect me for that. But if he's not loving me, he's not saying, hey, I'm acknowledging that you're doing this, if he's not stepping in and helping me or showing me somehow that that he loves me, that's not his respect means absolutely nothing to me.
Right.
And me loving him means something. He knows he's loved, but if you're not respected as a man,
the love don't matter.
It doesn't matter, and you're going to destroy your relationship with your husband.
Absolutely.
So when I say that about submission and that unpopular idea, I'm saying that you do need to respect your husband, and that's something that is someone that you've committed your life to. And this is what I tell my 15-year-old all the time. Be careful who you choose, because this is the person that you are committing your life to. And if this is not someone you can see down the line trusting and respecting them, this is somebody you probably don't want to date, Right. So anyways, all that to say, in making rules, a lot of times your husband, if you're respecting him, he will listen to you as you're making rules about discipline, or as you're discussing how you're going to discipline your children.
And you need to do that before you start having children. You need to have this conversation. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes, your wife ends up getting pregnant and you just don't know. But if that happens and that's your first, you guys need to have a conversation about how we're going to discipline our child, what we're going to allow, what we're not going to allow. Because one of the big things for me was I didn't want my kids in my bed. That was a huge deal to me. I didn't want my kids in my bed. And, sometimes I understand, but it's not going to be an every night thing. And that was a big deal for me. And I don't know that Haley felt necessarily that way, but
I do not.
Yeah.
I would have piled them all in the bed with me.
Yeah. And I would have been sleeping on the couch. And that happens a lot. And that really, really hurts relationships, because if the man's on the couch and the kids are in bed, it means he don't mean nothing to her, or not much. Kids mean more. And
see, that's the man's idea, even though that's really probably not what the woman means when she's doing that. She's trying to love her children, but as a man, you can see that made him feel disrespected to do that.
And the way that God has set this up is that the husbands are submissive to Christ. The wife is submissive to her husband, and so Christ comes first. And then you have the marriage relationship. My wife comes before my children, and I come before her children. And if you get married, that's the way it has to be. Your children can't come before your wife, and your children can't come before your husband. Your spouse has to come first underneath Christ, but your spouse has to come first. And a lot of dissension in relationships is because you guys are putting your children before your spouse, and you can't do that.
Right. So, and some of y'all are sitting there saying, well, we already have kids. Our kids are, already here, and we're struggling now with this. And this is what we're saying is you've got to go back to the drawing board and redo. And we've had to go back to the drawing board several times about things. Absolutely. Because, there's nothing ever written in stone as far as our relationship with our children. We try our best to follow biblical principles. Right. But there are things that come up that we're like, oh, okay, we didn't see this one coming. Right. We don't really know how to handle this.
Like kids threw us a curveball.
Yeah. And that happens. And the older they get, the more curveballs you get.
That's right.
But that's something that we're, like I've said before, we are not perfect. We are not the best at communicating all the time. It is something that we work on.
Right.
And so, if you're sitting out there and you are having problems with this and your husband is not on the same page with you, then this may be something that you need to go back and work on your relationship with him, because sometimes that is it's a little sign of maybe there's some things in your relationship that are not what they should be. And so children are a great tool to find every chink in your relationship there can possibly be.
And they will.
And they'll find it. And so there's nothing, kids and money are the two things that people fight over and that you have controversy over.
And the best thing you can do about both of them is sit down and have a conversation. Figure out, this podcast necessarily is not about money, but figure out who's going to handle the money. Who's going to pay the bills, who's going to do the checkbook. Sit down and have a conversation about these things. Disciplining your children is a huge thing that you guys need to sit down and have a conversation about. And like Haley just said, it may change. Y'all may be doing something and it may not be working, and y'all may need to sit down and have another conversation together to try to figure out what you can do better to raise your kids.
And if your spouse doesn't want to have the conversation, a lot of times there's a lot of personalities that avoid conflict. Right. And so, and sometimes your spouse doesn't want to have a conversation with you because they don't feel listened to.
Right.
So they think, okay, you're going to sit me down and you're going to talk at me, but you're not going to talk to me. So it's very, very important to become a really good listener.
Right.
To say, here's the problem. Let's talk about it and actually listen.
And that may be something that you have to do. You may have to go through some time to repair your relationship before y'all can really get on the same page as far as raising your children and being consistent and congruent in how you guys raise your children. It may be like Haley's saying that y'all just need to sit down and repair some of your relationship on listening to one another and having these conversations so that you can move forward with some of the conversations you need to have about being on the same page with raising your children. And we're speaking from a discipline perspective because that's mostly what comes up. This also goes into, some other rules, like are they going to spend the night off or not? Or if you're going to allow that, when? Or, when they start driving, or how you're going to raise them as far as that goes. There's so many things that as far as just eating food, are you going to be one of those families that if you have multiple children, you're going to fix whatever each one wants, or are you going to fix just a single meal for everybody to eat, and either they eat it or they don't? So there's a lot of stuff. We're speaking from a discipline perspective because that's where a lot of people has had taught. But this goes into almost every aspect of your life as far as raising children.
Right, and children do, like I said, they do bring a lot of controversy with them, not meaning to, but because children, they want their needs to be met, and they don't really care what happens, to you in the meantime, as long as their needs are met and they get what they want. They're basically selfish creatures. And so we as parents are here, we're trying to teach them and to discipline them, not to punish them, but to discipline them, which is a correction, not a punishment. And so this is something that we feel passionately about because we have been through this. We have had communication issues in the past, and we've really tried hard to work through them, and we continue to work through them. And there's times when we have to back up. One thing that our pastor has said before, and he is very right on this. If you start fighting and arguing about stuff, he'll say, "How's your quiet time going?" And that's the first thing he says when he counsels people. And so if we ever start fighting and communicating, that's been my thing. And well, we can go talk to Shane about it, but he's just going to say, how's your quiet time doing?
And Haley does that to me all the time. If we start having if she thinks I'm out of line, she'll just look at me and she goes, "So how's your quiet time been?" And if you can't really get mad about it, if your quiet time hasn't been great, sometimes it's better just to keep your mouth shut and be humble and know that maybe you are, snippety or your quiet time's not where it should be. But anyway, going back to what Haley was talking about, that you definitely need to be having a quiet time every morning to help things run smoothly. We are all God's children, so God is a professional in raising children.
Well, one of the things that that we have talked about in the past is having that third party involved. So if you have a book that you can read, and we've given y'all several suggestions,
right,
and we'll put some more on this at the end of our blog again this time. Again, this is something you and your husband can read together. There's a third party, so it's not I think, or this is what my family does. This is what has worked for these people. And then you and your spouse can talk about it, and that should get you on the same page.
That's right,
when you make that decision. So that's the biggest thing is doing some research. It's because the worst thing you can say to your spouse is, "Well, this is what my family's always done,"
right,
because then that brings in a whole nother thing where you can tear apart. Well, that didn't work for so and so, and that didn't work. So you don't want to do that necessarily. Although there are things that your family has done that's worked, and
or things that you like, things that you like what your parents were doing.
Yeah, but you don't use that to tell your spouse, "Hey, you may not be making the right decision." But Danny and I are quick to talk about when there's a problem with the kids and we don't feel like the other person has addressed it the way that maybe should have. That is something that we talk about behind closed doors,
right,
not in front of the children. This is not a discussion where we undermine each other in front of the kids. So
you guys, to start off with, we would definitely recommend the book Love and Respect by
Edgar Rich.
So y'all go check that out. Go check out the Guthrie Family blog. We'll put all these books in our blog for this podcast. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, these links will also be in the description.
Really work with you and your spouse with communication and work on your relationship, because that's key. And without you talking to your spouse and your spouse feeling heard,
right,
and you having a relationship with your spouse and putting them really first, when you do that, that changes the dynamic of the entire house.
Right.
And so that is the biggest thing I really challenge everybody to work on. It is hard to do. We're all busy, and it's hard to take that time to go on a date or just sit and have a conversation without kids being involved. Put your kids to bed.
right,
Sit in your room and have a conversation. Sit at the table, drink some coffee at night or some tea or something. Just have a conversation with just you and your spouse, because if your kids are always there and they're always inputting in your conversation, it's hard to really have a good conversation. I mean, it's just like your husband's your best friend.
right.
So he's the person that you love most in this world besides the Lord himself. And you really should not love your children above him, although you love them too. But he's your person. He is the person. When your kids are gone, he's going to be the one you're stuck with.
Right.
So you better learn to communicate now.
That's right. So, guys, thank you for being with us today. Please go check out our blog. It's Guthrie Family Blog, and we'll talk to you soon.